Well, each week a group of insiders joins me to offer perspective on some of the week's top stories. This week sounding off on a possible mass transit referendum. The search for a new Ivy Tech president continues, and also Indiana's stellar communities down to 6 finalists. Our insiders this week, Vox Global senior partner Mike Marker. Also, Kat Sapper and Miller's KSM Location Advisors President Katie Culp and Craig DeVault LLP Managing Partner Deborah Daniels. And welcome one and all to the insiders for another week. We start off news that really beginning to develop. It's been talked about for a long time, but now reaching an important point, mass transit. And Mike, it's been talked about for a long time. City County Council here in Indianapolis will be likely voting perhaps early next month on putting a referendum, putting it before the voters in terms of funding mass transit. Do you see this happening, and do you think it's important that it does happen?
So I think it's critically important. I mean, as you noted, we've been talking about it for years. We really need a dedicated revenue source for mass transit to make this happen, to modernize our mass transit system. When you look at competing with other regional markets, it's something we absolutely need to have. And it's not just really for it's for getting workers to the jobs, but it's also for employers because they desperately need it to retain workers, to recruit workers that need to have reliable transportation to get to their jobs and don't necessarily want to own a car. In terms of whether it'll get done, that's the big question mark, right? Because you're going to have people vote for it, and you're going to have a lot of people who have to vote for it who don't currently use it. So they're going to have to see the economic development value in this, the long-term opportunity, which is really there. It's not going to cost much money, but the return's going to be great. So I hope it gets done, and it needs to get done.
How important is that education, for lack of a better term, that public relations campaign that you could do a good job on, right? How important is that to this being ultimately successful?
I think it's going to be vitally important because, you know, the community can get around things where they can see that it's going to benefit the community. When we think about sports stadium, when we think about things that are known for moving the city forward, people can rally around those things. This is absolutely one of those things. This can take us to the next level, and we desperately need this. So people are going to have to kind of be educated, be informed, get the message that even if I'm not going to use this, it's very important for our city moving forward. And the other piece on education is connecting students, traditional students and adult learners, to all of our higher education institutions around the city through mass transit. And we need that for increasing our talent and skilling up.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a hard sell, and I don't think anybody should underestimate it. And I would compare it to the campaign for the new Wishard that became the beautiful Eskenazi Hospital. But there was a massive campaign to educate the entire community because the people who needed to vote were not traditional users of what they had to offer. And it worked, so it can work, but people are really going to have to gin up a good education effort.
How important is kind of, in terms of a challenge, kind of that cultural, the culture here? We're not really a bus using region.
Right. I think, you know, Mike mentioned that the people who need to vote for this are not necessarily people that use mass transit. And so I think that's a hill to climb. Yeah,
Katie, back to the need for this. From a competitiveness standpoint, for Indianapolis to not have mass transit, to not have this, does it put Indianapolis, in your view, or this region at a competitive disadvantage?
I think it does from an economic development standpoint, and again, there will need to be communications, you know, to underline that, but also from a workforce standpoint. You know, everybody's talking about millennials, but millennials care about mass transit, and that is the largest growing sector of workforce, so we've got to address that.
A lot of focus on quality of life around the state. The Regional Cities Initiative, one of those efforts really focused on quality of place, quality of life. Stellar Communities, another program at the state level, this week announcing 6 finalists for essentially funding services and assistance to help with quality of life issues. These smaller communities, 6 of them again named this week. How important, in your view, are programs like this that really focus on quality of life in smaller communities?
I think it's really important. I think the gist behind this program is to really have a lot of strategic planning support. So they're getting some funding to really develop a game plan and a strategy to execute. And not everybody's as lucky as some of the more urban areas where growth is sort of happening organically and naturally. So I think enabling smaller communities to devise a plan to really go after their vision is important. I think it's a great program.
Yeah, it's a great program, getting a lot of interest around the state. We're also seeing around the state these co-working spaces that are really popping up, not just in Indianapolis and in the larger metropolitan areas, but in smaller communities. This week, Matchbox announced or celebrated its second anniversary in Lafayette, West Lafayette. As you look at this trend, kind of getting away from traditional offices, seems to be spreading around the state of Indiana.
Well, it's really fascinating, and I think it's essential to startups that they not have, obviously, huge overhead. They're just not going to make it. And so this gives them a place to be, a place with resources. You know, you can even have 3D printers and, you know, laser technology if you need it. And then I presume that as they get bigger, you know, and begin to outgrow this, then maybe they undertake the high overhead that's necessary if you lease your own space and get your own copiers. And,
Mike, there's a lot of talk about innovation and the growth and the momentum behind entrepreneurship in the state. We talk about these co-working spaces going from 0 to, I think there are 50 plus now around the state. Warsaw OrthoWorks announced one focused specifically on the orthopedic sector. What does that say about this innovation momentum, if you will, in Indiana?
I think it says that people are willing to make more bets than they used to because they see tremendous upside, right? And with the accelerator, I think the thing that's exciting there for entrepreneurs and thinkers and doers is they're going to get access to capital and they're going to get access to expertise, consultants who have been to the rodeo before, know the potholes, and can help them. And when you look at the orthopedics market in general in this state, such a big driver for us and for that region specifically. So I was glad to see Warsaw on that list of stellar communities. But when you look at the age, the demographic cliff that's coming up in orthopedics, what innovators can do in that space and the need that's going to be there in that market as people age, it's really huge.
Do you think, you mentioned taking more bets, do you think Indiana is becoming a little more or a little less risk averse? You know, we've always been a state that, you know, hasn't really stepped out there a bit, but this would seem to be maybe a change.
You know, I see a trend in all the topics we've been discussing. I mean, that's what's going on. We're taking more risks. We're doing things that are necessary, but maybe a little outside our comfort zone to get us to the kind of economic development that we need.
Yeah, economic development, workforce is a big piece of economic development, and certainly a process is underway now, reaching kind of the home stretch, I think, at Ivy Tech Community College, interviewing for the successor to Tom Snyder as the president of the university. Don't know who it's going to be. Certainly, we saw this week that former Indianapolis Mayor Greg Ballard withdrew his name. Former Lieutenant Governor Sue Ellspermann seen as the front runner. Katie, as you look at the importance of whoever is selected for this next job, how important is it?
I think it's critically important. You know, when we do work all over the country, there are similar institutions that have, you know, certainly they're already strong, but the marriage of education, workforce development, training with employers, I think that's the future for this organization, and I think the next person who leads it will certainly have a good grasp on all those issues.
And this position, you know, it's an academic position, but it would seem to be, you know, that workforce piece, and that has got to be a very important part of it.
Yeah, I think that is critically important. It's not a traditional 4-year. This is something that is critical to sort of just-in-time workforce training, right? So in addition to getting people through their first 2 years and maybe moving on to a 4-year institution, there's this entire certification process that's necessary and working with employers around the state. So you need somebody who is networked with the employers around the state, and I think, you know, quite frankly, you do have in Sue Ellspermann that person. Maybe there are others.
Seems to have the resume, you know, for it, certainly.
Sure. And has been in higher education.
Yeah, also.
You know,
That's it.
right.
As we wrap up, interesting to look around the state this week. Indiana Wesleyan announcing plans to start a football program in 2017. Also, Trine in far northeast Indiana, announcing launching $16 million for a new men's and women's hockey program. Mike, as you look at these investments, perhaps they're looking at what happened at Marion University and the success of that football program, not only on the field, but in terms of attracting students and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think there's a mixed bag when it comes to this. I think there's certainly examples with Marion, and Indiana Wesleyan's taken a long, hard look at this. I mean, they've thought about this for several years. They've decided they're going to jump into this. I really hope it works. They have some models to follow, but they've talked about it being an enrollment growth strategy and increasing sustainability for the institution, and it's super, and I really hope it works. But if you look around the nation on enrollment, growth, recruiting, Butler's really the gold standard for it. But not a lot of others have had great success at it, so it's tough to do.
Yeah.
Not to say they can't get it done, and I hope they do, but it'll be tough.
We'll see how that plays out. Mike Marker, Deborah Daniels, Katie Culp, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be right back after this.